Folks, Calvin Booth has said some stuff about KCP in his latest press conference after the draft. I was there in person. Swipa, you were reacting to everything, have had some time to react over the course of these last few hours. Calvin Booth basically says we will be okay if Kentavious Caldwell-Pope does not return, cited that Christian Braun was ready to step into that starting shooting guard spot. Overall, what's your take on that? What's your take that Calvin Booth even went there with KCP?
Yeah, I mean, the first sign is that this is Calvin Booth believing in his guys, and he's been consistent on this since Bruce Brown left with the Peyton Watson information, and he has drafted Christian Braun and Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther. And I think some of this for this reason, looking long-term, saying if we need to replace one of our starters, and namely KCP, do we have someone in-house that we can develop and get in that spot? And this is kind of what he's been preparing for. And so I think they have a number in mind that they're willing to pay KCP, and then they have a number that they're not willing to go over. And if that's the case, as Calvin Booth said, per Ryan Blackburn's article, look, they have to find a way to replace their fourth, fifth, sixth starters off, six man off the bench, and keep it rolling. It would be nice if KCP is back. But I think for me, I would just, if I was teaching communication, because I do a lot of public speaking, right?
Yes, you do.
I would say that the way you would want to frame that is we would love to have KCP back in house. He's an NBA champion twice over. He helped us to win one. He's one of the best defensive players in the league. Our team is better with him in it. If we have to do without him, we'll find a way. But we would like to have KCP back. And then you can be like, Christian Braun, this and that. But just the way he framed it was almost as if like, yeah, CBA's tough. We have a number. KCP's really good, but if you look at the net rating with Christian Braun with Jokic, it's even better. So just the framing of it was interesting. But I think this is just Calvin Booth showing that he believes in his guys.
Yeah, and look, it's not a surprise. He drafted Christian Braun. He was the first move he made as general manager outside of trading JaMychal Green, I think. This is a sign, I think, that the second tax apron, that the CBA has really impacted contending teams like the Nuggets that want to have flexibility, that want to have a little bit of leeway to be able to kind of build the next version of their most competitive self. And the choice that Denver has been sort of weighing here is something that Calvin Booth laid out, is that the CBA is really, really hard to deal with. If Denver brought back KCP at the number that they're talking about, not even just that number, if they brought him back at all, like, they are going to have a lot of struggles in trying to build and fill in the gaps around their roster. And if you have any doubts that this starting lineup is the best in the NBA, and I think that it's reasonable to have doubts given the way that they finished out this last year, I think that you need some flexibility. We've already talked about ball handling, and KCP doesn't really provide much of that. Yeah. We talked about shooting. In theory, KCP is one of your floor spacers, but he didn't really do a lot in the playoffs. So I can understand why the Nuggets would be at least open to the possibility of doing some other things, which kind of limits the number that they should put on KCP, which the reported number is like $25 million a year, man. That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, look, 10 years ago, $25 million a year was reserved for Kobe Bean Bryant when he finished his career. So, it's tough because this is just a new wave of the NBA. We just saw a certified role player, an elite role player, but who plays less than MPJ, get 5 years, $215 million in OG Anunoby. Yeah. So obviously there's a premium on defensive wings that can just bring a lot of value on that end. But I do think that if the Nuggets don't re-sign KCP because the number is just that outrageous, then look, they got to be willing to pivot. But I think for me, Ryan, and this is a lead into the next point, that if they don't re-sign KCP because the number is just much too high for their own liking, that gives them some flexibility so Christian Braun can move into that 2 spot. But Ryan, if it's me, there's no way that it can end there. They would have to make some pretty stark upgrades in order to make that happen.
And Calvin Booth actually mentioned that at the post-season press conference just about a month ago, where he was looking at like, hey, we got to probably look at our top 7 players and try to upgrade that. I don't know what that means. And losing your 5th best player in KCP certainly hurts that. So if you are at this position where, yeah, we're trying to upgrade and you lose your fifth best player, you better believe that your sixth and seventh best players have got to be upgraded too. I believe, and I'm going to go out on a limb on this, I believe that Christian Braun is good enough to be Denver's fifth starter and they can win a championship. I believe that that can happen. But what it means is that their sixth man, seventh man, those guys have to be good enough and versatile enough, talented enough, and veterans that they bring in and continue to cultivate so that they don't lose ground in a lot of this situation. Think about the way that the Dallas Mavericks sort of built their team. They have multiple players coming off their bench, like a Derek Lively, like a Josh Green, Dante Exum, players of that nature that gave them the flexibility that helped them get to the Western Conference Finals, even when their starters weren't good enough. Denver has to be willing to add players, and that means making trades. That means using your taxpayer mid-level exception, which they don't get unless KCP walks. It means you're ducking the second tax apron, and I think in this case, it's okay.
Let me ask you this. So let's just say the Nuggets stay as is, right? They have Jamal Murray, KCP, Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, Deron Holmes II.
Hell yeah.
And then that's kind of their young boy bench rotation, right? And then they got Julian Strawther, obviously.
Right.
So then now Reggie Jackson and Jalen Pickett are your backup point guards. Would you prefer that lineup construction with basically four youngins that are year 3 to 1 with Reggie and Jalen? Or would you prefer KCP walks? Then now you slot in Christian Braun. They use their taxpayer MLE on Chris Dunn, and then they trade for Bogdan Bogdanovic and from the Atlanta Hawks. And so now your rotation is going to be Jamal, CB, MPJ, AG, Jokic. Now you got Bogey, Chris Dunn, Peyton Watson, Holmes with Julian Strawther.
I think that's a better team. I honestly do. I think it's a better, more versatile team that gives Denver the needed ball handling and creativity and spacing that they lacked. Bogdanovic is one of the best bench scorers in the entire NBA. He can handle the ball. He can make decisions. And Chris Dunn's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA at this stage of his career. And you don't get the flexibility to do that unless you make this hard decision. So it's a really tough call, man. Can they get back and win a title by going back to that first iteration that you're talking about where either Reggie or Jalen Pickett's kind of the main guy as the point guard? I think they can, but I also think that has some weaknesses, and it puts a lot of pressure on those guys, and it puts more pressure on Jamal Murray in that case, where if you get a guy like Bogdanovic, if you get a guy like Chris Dunn that you really trust as a backup, it actually alleviates some of the pressure on Jamal in some of those cases. So it's tough, man. I don't know what the right answer is, but I know that Calvin Booth is weighing all of these options and doing his best.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the sake of Serbia, I would love to see Bogdanovic in Denver with Nikola Jokic. I mean, just the fanfare, the global audience, the acclaim, the aura would be out of this world. So, and I think Jokic would be like, I think special for him too, to be able to have that, because they obviously get along so well for the national team. But yeah, I mean, look, everybody knows I love KCP. I think he could have been first team all NBA defense this last year. He's really an incredible player. I wanted him before the Nuggets got him. Like, I was very clear that I think him and Bruce Brown should be in Denver, and they won a championship. And his defense, remember, Ryan, that game 2 performance he had versus the Suns, I think he had 21 points in that game in round 2. And then in game 4, when the Nuggets were down 15, it was KCP in the third quarter and the fourth quarter that brought them back. And then it was KCP's defense in the NBA Finals versus Jimmy Butler that changed the end of that game. Got a strip against Jimmy and then stole the ball at the end of the game. So he has so many moments with Denver. But look, if you're telling me that, he can get his money, get his generational wealth that he deserves, take care of his family for the rest of his life and beyond, but then the Nuggets can go in and put CB in that slot, get 2 more cheap years of contract, get Bogey from the bench, get Chris Dunn, then look, that is just a better basketball team. And now you got a locked in top 6 that you just trust. And then I believe a top 7 now with Chris Dunn. So I would probably opt for that, but I also would be more than completely fine with KCP coming back to Denver on a lesser deal than $25 million a year.
Denver would have to do it. they can't sit on their hands. I think that, like you said at the beginning, it can't just be elevating Christian Braun, elevating Julian Strother, elevating Jalen Pickett. Like that can't be the plan. Denver's got to go out and get some help because they're going to need it if they want to ever compete again. I agree with you on KCP. I don't think that he's worth $25 million a year. I think that Denver's got to do the smart thing. I've mentioned this before. This is the circle of life for every NBA contender in history. Every single one. Sometimes your veterans have to walk out the door to earn that money, and you have to find a way to replace them in the best way that you can. And I think that this is the best way. It just sucks. KCP will always be a champion in Denver. He'll always be valued. There's no question about that. Denver might have to make a tough decision, though, and it's a tough place to be.
Yeah, and literally just got the news from Shams. Denver's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is declining his $15.4 million player option for the 2024-2025 season to become a free agent, sources tell me, and Tony Jones. Shout out Tony Jones. Caldwell-Pope, a two-time NBA champion, is expected to receive interest from multiple teams with salary cap space.
Did you see the recent tweet for Shams? Denver and star Jamal Murray are working towards a 4-year, $209 million max contract extension.
We should probably talk about that.
Yeah. Let's do that on a Never the Video. Everybody, thanks for tuning in here on Calvin Booth discussing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. We will see what happens for the rest of this offseason. Sounds like we're going to have some very interesting topics to discuss. He's Swipa. I'm Ryan. We're out.